The room was buzzing long before Donald Trump even took the stage. Cameras were already rolling, reporters whispering predictions into microphones, and the audience filled with that familiar mix of supporters, critics, and curious onlookers, who came not only to hear what he would say, but to see if he would push the limits once again. When Trump walked up to the podium, his stride was deliberate, his face carrying that trademark grin that suggested he was in full command of the moment. He leaned forward, adjusted the microphone, and within seconds, the room was his. The energy shifted as he launched into his usual rhythm, blending confident declarations with pointed jabs. Barack Obama was in the audience. Seated quietly, composed as always, his expression unreadable. To anyone who had followed the history between the two men, there was already a subtle tension hanging in the air. Trump thrived in that kind of tension. He seemed to feed off it, drawing strength from confrontation, especially when it meant challenging someone with Obama's stature. His words started out broad, touching on politics, leadership, and his usual refrain about strength and weakness in America. But as his speech unfolded, there was a change in his tone. His pauses grew shorter, his words sharper, and his eyes flickered toward the section of the audience where Obama sat. That's when it happened. Trump leaned forward on the podium, let a moment of silence stretch, and with a sly smirk delivered the insult. It wasn't vague. It wasn't veiled. It was personal, direct, and designed to sting. The crowd reacted instantly. Gasps mixed with laughter, reporters snapped their heads up, and cameras zoomed in to capture every possible reaction. The insult had cut across the room like a knife, and for the first time in the evening, the spotlight wasn't on Trump's performance, it was on Obama's response. 417 long seconds. The air was thick. All eyes shifted from Trump's smirk to Obama's face. Would he react? Would he fire back in the same way? His posture didn't change. His expression was steady, unflinching, the kind of composure that left people second-guessing whether he had even been rattled at all. Trump, seeing no immediate reaction, doubled down with that familiar expression of satisfaction, as though the insult had landed exactly the way he wanted. But even in that pause, there was something brewing that no one in the audience, not even Trump himself, could have anticipated. The insult wasn't just words tossed into the air. It was a spark. It ignited a silence that felt heavier with each passing second, building suspense as the cameras stayed locked on Obama. Reporters later described it as one of the most uncomfortable pauses they had ever experienced during a political event. The room wasn't just waiting for Obama's reaction. It was waiting for history to decide whether this insult would stand as just another jab, or whether it would transform into something far bigger. Trump, for his part, seemed to enjoy the discomfort. He thrived on those moments of imbalance, where he appeared to have the upper hand. His supporters in the crowd chuckled, whispered, and nudged each other, reading the situation as another victory for him. Yet those who knew Obama well recognized the look on his face. It wasn't one of defeat, it wasn't even one of annoyance. It was the calm calculation of someone who was already deciding how to turn the tables. The insult would be remembered not only for the words Trump used, but for what it unleashed. It wasn't just a jab in a speech. It was the first domino in a chain reaction that would ripple through headlines, social media, and legal battles. That single remark, delivered in a room filled with flashing cameras and watchful eyes, set the stage for something unprecedented. What began as an attempt to embarrass Obama became the moment that shifted control. A miscalculation that would reverberate far beyond those walls. That sparked Trump's insult wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of one that would shock everyone watching. One that transformed 17 seconds of silence into a lifetime of consequences. The audience didn't know it yet, but they were witnessing the opening act of a confrontation that would change the entire narrative in ways no one had predicted. And it all began with a few words from Trump, spoken with the intention to wound but destined to backfire in a way no one in that room could have foreseen. Would you like me to move on and expand Keynote 2 in the same storytelling style for 700 words? The silence that followed Donald Trump's insult was unlike anything the room had experienced before. For 17 seconds, it was as if the oxygen had been drained out of the hall. Reporters who were used to the rapid fire of political sparring found themselves frozen, their pens hovering in midair. The crowd shifted uneasily, some waiting for laughter to break the tension, others bracing for what they assumed would be an immediate verbal counterattack. But Barack Obama didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting lightly in his lap, his expression calm and almost unreadable. That pause became more powerful than any words spoken up to that point. Trump, on the other hand, reveled in it. He thrived on pauses when they belonged to him, when they punctuated his own remarks. But this was different. For a moment, even he looked slightly uncertain. He had expected a quick comeback or at least a visible flash of irritation. Instead, the lack of reaction seemed to hang in the air like a question mark. His grin flickered, just for a second, before he leaned on the podium, as though reminding himself he had control of the stage. Yet in that silence, the energy of the room had already shifted. Those 17 seconds became their own story. The cameras zoomed in on Obama, capturing the way he didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't let his eyes dart away. It was as though he knew the world was watching, and he wanted them to see restraint rather than reaction. Trump's insult, sharp as it was, suddenly seemed smaller in the face of that kind of composure. People in the audience later described the pause as unbearable. Every second that ticked by felt longer than the last. It wasn't just silence, it was anticipation. Obama's restraint during those 17 seconds told its own narrative. For his supporters, it was a reminder of the steadiness that had defined his leadership, the ability to absorb pressure without letting it dictate his actions. For Trump's followers, it was confusing, even frustrating. They were used to confrontation, to fire being met with fire. Instead, Obama sat there like a stone wall, quietly dismantling the moment not by what he said, but by what he chose not to say at least. Not yet. Trump, feeling the tension, tried to fill the gap. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and made a small quip to the audience as though to reassert dominance. But it didn't land. The laughter was scattered, weak, and half-hearted. Everyone was still waiting. The insult hadn't reached its conclusion because the story wasn't finished. That pause was the bridge between the attack and the response. A gap in time where the room braced itself for something bigger. What made the 17 seconds so striking was that they stripped away Trump's usual advantage. His power often came from controlling the tempo, from overwhelming opponents with rapid, relentless words. But Obama slowed everything down. In that pause, Trump's remark didn't feel sharp and commanding, it felt reckless, hanging in the air without the usual applause to prop it up. Those few seconds of stillness gave weight to the insult in a way that made it dangerous for Trump. What might have been brushed aside as just another jab became magnified by the quiet aftermath. The reporters later described it as one of the longest pauses in recent political memory. Each second became heavier, the murmurs growing louder, the cameras capturing every angle of the two men. The audience didn't yet know what was coming, but they could sense it. Something about the way Obama held himself suggested intention, a patience that wasn't born out of hesitation but out of calculation. The pause wasn't an absence of action, it was a deliberate setup. When Obama finally did lean forward, it wasn't rushed, it wasn't reactive. The 17 seconds of silence had prepared the ground, had built the tension to the point where even a single word would carry extraordinary weight. Trump had expected a flustered retort, maybe even a defensive explanation. Instead, what he had really given Obama was time to let the audience's anticipation build, time to let the insult linger until it no longer seemed like just a throwaway line. Those 17 seconds became the turning point. They weren't just a pause. They were a trap, one Trump had unknowingly stepped into. Obama's calm during that silence disarmed the room, flipped the energy, and placed all eyes firmly on him. When he did finally open his mouth, the silence made his words echo even louder. The insult that Trump thought would define the moment instead became the setup for a response that no one in the hall, least of all Trump, could have predicted. Would you like me to expand Keynote 3 in the same style and length now? When Barack Obama finally leaned forward into the microphone, the room seemed to exhale all at once. The 17 seconds of silence had stretched into something unbearable, and now every ear was tuned to him. His tone was even, his pace deliberate, his words carefully measured. He didn't return the insult with another insult, nor did he waste time with emotion. Instead, he spoke with the calm authority of a man who had already made a decision long before stepping into the room. What he revealed next was not just unexpected, it was staggering. Obama announced that a lawsuit had been filed. A $100 million legal action directed squarely at Donald Trump. The words landed like a thunderclap. For a split second, the audience wasn't sure if they had heard correctly. Reporters froze, then scrambled, their pens racing across paper, their cameras clicking frantically. Trump's smirk faltered, the confidence slipping ever so slightly from his face as he realized the gravity of what had just been said. The insult he had thrown out so casually was no longer the story. The lawsuit was, Obama's delivery was, steady, almost understated, but that made it all the more powerful. He didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply outlined that the legal system would now address the attack, that the words Trump had thought would evaporate into the air would instead live on in the form of court documents and legal proceedings. For the first time that evening, Trump was no longer in control of the narrative. The cameras, the microphones, the audience, all of it had turned. The announcement wasn't just shocking because of the amount. Though $100 million was enough to seize anyone's attention, it was shocking because of the timing. Obama had chosen that exact moment, in the wake of Trump's insult, to reveal the lawsuit. The precision of it was devastating. It wasn't reactionary, it was calculated. He had taken Trump's strongest weapon, the public stage, and used it against him in real time. The room erupted in murmurs, and within moments the news had already begun to spread beyond the walls. Phones buzzed as messages shot across social media. Headlines were drafted in real time, and live coverage replayed the announcement over and over. What had started as another fiery Trump moment had transformed into a legal bombshell that no one had anticipated. Trump shifted uncomfortably behind the podium, searching for footing, but there was none. Obama had altered the dynamic completely. Asterisk for Trump. The lawsuit was more than a legal threat. It was a public humiliation. He had built his persona on dominance, on always having the last word, on reducing his opponents with sharp insults. But here, his own tactic had been neutralized in an instant. The insult that had drawn gasps just minutes before now seemed insignificant compared to the weight of the lawsuit. The focus was no longer on his bravado, but on the very real, very tangible consequences that were about to unfold. Asterisk, the audience could feel the shift. They had come expecting entertainment, perhaps even confrontation, but what they received was something altogether different. They witnessed a reversal that few had ever seen happen so swiftly and so decisively. Obama hadn't just defended himself, he had gone on offense, not with words meant to sting, but with action meant to last. Asterisk, reporters later noted that Trump's expression in that moment was telling. The usual confidence gave way to something else, a flicker of recognition that the ground beneath him had changed. His supporters in the crowd tried to rally with applause and shouts, but it felt hollow against the weight of what had just been revealed. The lawsuit wasn't a line in a speech that could be brushed aside. It was a legal reality that would follow him long after the cameras stopped rolling. Asterisk, Obama, having said what needed to be said, didn't linger on the moment. He didn't stretch it out for drama. He simply leaned back from the microphone, his composure unshaken, leaving the words to settle on their own. The silence that followed was different from the one before. It wasn't tense or was heavy with realization. Everyone in the room understood they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The instant when a verbal attack turned into a legal counterstrike worth $100 million. Asterisk, the shockwave didn't end there. Within minutes, networks ran breaking news banners. Analysts speculated on the implications, and legal experts began weighing in. The world outside that hall learned what those in the room already knew, that Trump's insult had sparked a response. Unlike anything anyone had predicted, what he thought would be a moment of dominance had instead opened the door to a battle that would stretch far beyond speeches and applause. Do you want me to now expand Keynote 4 in 700 words in the same style? The air inside the hall had shifted completely. Moments earlier, Donald Trump had been riding the energy of the crowd, tossing out jabs and leaning into his familiar rhythm of provocation. But once Barack Obama announced the $100 million lawsuit, the balance of power flipped with breathtaking speed. The crowd, once noisy and reactive, seemed unsure of itself now. Supporters who had laughed at the insult fidgeted in their seats, their chuckles dying into silence. Reporters were no longer looking at Trump for sound bites. They were glued to Obama, scribbling every word, capturing every detail, knowing they were witnessing a moment that would dominate headlines. Asterisk, the shockwave was immediate. Some in the audience gasped, others whispered frantically, phones buzzing as people live tweeted what they had just heard. Trump, usually quick to fire back, hesitated. For the first time in the evening he seemed caught off guard, his usual composure shaken. His jaw tightened as he tried to reassert control of the room, but it was already gone. Obama had shifted the spotlight away from Trump's insult and redirected it toward the lawsuit, and once the cameras picked it up, there was no turning back. Asterisk, observers noticed the contrast in the two men more than ever. Trump, restless and visibly irritated, tried to interject with offhand comments, but they fell flat. Obama, on the other hand, sat quietly, letting the words he had spoken linger. His silence was no longer the silence of anticipation, it was the silence of dominance. He didn't need to say more. The lawsuit itself was louder than any insult could ever be. Asterisk, within the crowd, the atmosphere turned electric with uncertainty. People shifted in their seats, realizing they had just watched the entire evening transform in real time. What had begun as a predictable Trump performance had become something far more consequential. The murmurs of the audience reflected the duality of the moment. Shock at the scale of the lawsuit, and awe at the way Obama had delivered it. Those who admired him saw the move as a masterstroke, measured, decisive, and devastating. Those who favored Trump struggled to process what had just unfolded, clapping awkwardly, hoping to reignite the energy. But it never quite returned. Asterisk, the press corps, always quick to sense a shift, flooded the back of the hall with calls to their editors. News alerts began lighting up phones. Obama hits Trump with $100 million lawsuit after public insult. Within minutes, social media feeds exploded with clips of the announcement. Hashtags spread, memes circulated, and commentators began weighing in. What had been intended as another spectacle of words had become an international headline. Asterisk, Trump attempted to recover, stepping back to the microphone with a forced grin, but the weight of the moment pressed down on him. His voice, usually booming and commanding, seemed strained. He tried to mock the lawsuit, brushing it off as a stunt, but the effort lacked conviction. The audience had seen his initial reaction, the flicker of surprise, the tightening of his jaw. They knew the lawsuit wasn't just talk. Obama had delivered it with the certainty of someone who had already set the gears in motion. Asterisk, the aftermath inside the hall was undeniable. People who had come expecting entertainment left instead, with a story they would retell again and again. They had witnessed a reversal unlike anything they had ever seen, a man insulted in public turning the tables not with a quick retort but with a legal blow that carried real weight. The lawsuit transformed the insult into something permanent, a reminder that words could have consequences far beyond applause and laughter. Asterisk. Obama's composure in the minutes after the reveal only deepened the impact. He didn't look triumphant, nor did he seek validation from the crowd. He simply sat back, calm and steady, as though the outcome had been inevitable all along. That quiet confidence contrasted sharply with Trump's agitation, and the cameras picked up every detail. The image of Trump trying to regain control, and Obama sitting unshaken became the lasting snapshot of the evening. Asterisk. As people filed out of the hall, the conversations were dominated by a single question. How could Trump have miscalculated so badly? The insult had been his attempt to command attention, but instead, it had opened the door for Obama to deliver one of the most shocking counterpunches imaginable. The ripple effects were already spreading beyond the event, shaping narratives, influencing discussions, and raising questions about what the lawsuit would mean in the weeks and months ahead. Asterisk. By the time the lights dimmed and the stage was cleared, it was clear that nothing about the evening had gone the way Trump intended. The insult, which was supposed to define the night, was overshadowed by the lawsuit that followed. The shockwave left behind wasn't just about the legal case itself, it was about the way Obama had turned a moment of attempted humiliation into a defining act of retaliation. And as the news spread across screens worldwide, it became obvious that the 17 seconds of silence and the lawsuit reveal would be remembered, long after the insult itself had been forgotten. Would you, like me too, now write the 500-word ending statements in the same style to complete the set? As the night drew to a close, the event no longer felt like a routine clash of personalities. It had evolved into something much larger, a story that would echo far beyond the walls of that hall. People left their seats slowly, still whispering to one another, their faces reflecting disbelief at what they had just witnessed. The insult, the pause, the lawsuit, each moment, layered onto the next until the evening transformed into a turning point. For Donald Trump, the attempt to seize the spotlight with a cutting remark had spiraled into an unforeseen challenge. For Barack Obama, it was an opportunity seized with precision, a reminder of how control can shift in a heartbeat. When timing is exact and words are measured, asterisk, the lawsuit was not just a legal announcement. It became a symbol. It carried the weight of accountability, suggesting that words, no matter how casually delivered, could have tangible consequences. Obama had demonstrated that retaliation did not always come in the form of raised voices or sharp comebacks. Sometimes, it arrived in the form of steady, calculated action that changed the story completely. His ability to remain composed under pressure, to let silence work in his favor, and then to deliver a decisive blow made the moment unforgettable. Asterisk. Trump's reaction lingered in the minds of many who had been there. The tightening of his jaw, the brief loss of his trademark confidence, revealed something rare, a glimpse of vulnerability. He was a man who built his image on dominance, on always being the loudest voice in the room. Yet in that instant, the dynamic shifted, and he found himself on the defensive. The crowd, which had once been firmly under his command, was no longer laughing with him. They were watching him recalibrate, trying to steady himself after being hit with something he hadn't anticipated. Asterisk. For the public, the night offered a lesson about the unpredictability of power. Moments of bravado could collapse when faced with calm resolve. Insults might capture attention, but they could also backfire when met with substance. Obama's response underscored that real strength sometimes lies not in how loudly one speaks, but in how carefully one acts. His choice to let Trump's insult hang in the air, to give it weight, and then to answer with a $100 million lawsuit was more than a counterpunch. It was a redefining of the rules of engagement. Asterisk. In the days that followed, analysts and commentators would replay the exchange endlessly, dissecting every second of the 17-second silence. Every syllable of Obama's announcement, every flicker in Trump's expression. But those who were in the room didn't need analysis to understand what they had seen. They knew they had witnessed a rare shift, a moment when the expected outcome collapsed, and the unexpected took over. Asterisk. And so the evening ended, not with laughter or applause, but with a sense of awe. A simple insult had set off a chain of events no one predicted. A lawsuit, staggering in scale, had become the defining headline. And two men, locked in a long and public rivalry, had once again reminded the world that in politics, as in life, the balance of power can turn in an instant, sometimes in just 17 seconds. Would you like me to compile all 4 expanded keynotes, plus the ending, into one continuous storytelling piece?